Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Hunold, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you all today on behalf of our co-host. I'm with ClimeFi. We represent the interests of buyers in this market, so we're very thrilled to have you all here today to talk about really what we focus on, which is rationalizing CDR procurement on behalf of buyers in the market. And this is a stunning location, so we hope you all enjoy it. We have an excellent lineup here, but I also wanted to introduce our co-hosts, which is, we have Mark here from Carboneers, and you just met Maria from InPlanet. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over so we can have a discussion, and then, of course, we're all here to enjoy the art. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna come sit down here. Panel can come and sit, I think. My name's Chris Neidl. I'm the carbon removal lead for the Climate High Level Champions. So work primarily on how do we get CDR as deeply and permanently lodged in the COP action agenda as possible. And let me just sort of reiterate a little bit with a wow that we're in this location. And I think it's a great indicator of how far carbon removal has come in a very short time. Having so much discussion of carbon removal at London Climate Week and to be in venues like this was something that was inconceivable a short time ago. I started in carbon removal close to a decade ago when the carbon removal community was basically 10 weirdos exchanging emails. We certainly weren't holding things here. And I think it's been impressive to see how carbon removal has evolved. And what we're going to talk about today with Beyond Carbon, I think is the latest and most important kind of iteration or form that carbon removal has taken. And if we think back even in 2018, when the global warming of 1.5C report came out from the IPCC, which was sort of year one, I think, of the world really mobilizing or beginning to around carbon removal. Back then, carbon removal was just a scary graph, and there was really very little understanding of how we were going to do this. And in the years since, this unprecedented evolution of the different ways that we've discovered of how to do carbon removal has changed our thinking on what carbon removal is and what it can deliver. Is it's landed in the world, in contexts, in value chains, in industries. What we've discovered about carbon removal is it's not this separate planet that we're demanding the world to take on in addition to mitigation, adaptation, and all of our other priorities, but rather it lives within those priorities and can actually help propel them. And that is the big mutation. And now even the word co-benefit, which we've used for so long, is becoming somewhat passé because it doesn't exactly communicate the extent, I think, of the beyond carbon value. So as today, the conversation that we're gonna have, I think, with amazing representatives, and this is probably no more vivid and true and immediate than in the carbon removal forms that are within agriculture. And so we're gonna have a great discussion with some of the leading proponents and exponents in this field about beyond value. How do we think about carbon removals beyond just the carbon? And what does that mean for buyers in terms of what they're buying and supporting? So with that, I'm very happy to allow the panel to introduce I don't need a mic. My New York voice is so loud it's gonna like crack some of the artwork here. But I'm gonna hand over the mic here and allow our esteemed panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll get the conversation going.
I'm Maarten. I'm from Carboneers. We're a Dutch biochar startup located in Utrecht and Amsterdam with projects in India and Ghana. And by now we're the third largest carbon removal company in the world per ton removed.
Great, thank you so much. I'm Christina. I lead the science team at InPlanet. We're a German-Brazilian startup that deploys enhanced rock weathering in Brazil.
Hi everyone, first thanks for having us in this wonderful location. I'm Ella, I'm the technical lead for the Carbon Removal and Super Pollutant Program at Google. And our mission is to help Google reach net zero in whatever way best helps the planet reach net zero. So we procure carbon credits across durable carbon removals, nature-based carbon removals, and super pollutant abatement.
I'm Victoria Harvey. I'm the head of CDR at ClimeFi, overseeing our intelligence and supply management. Megan already introduced us, but we support buyers entering the space to make strategic decisions in their durable carbon removal portfolios, and also just grateful to be at the National Gallery as a Londoner.
Hi, good morning. Eduardo Bastos. I'm from Brazil. I'm the chairman of C-Carbon, which is today the largest center in the Global South for R&D inside Exalc in Piracicaba. You can see a photo from Piracicaba in the banner over there. And as C-Carbon, I'm the president of the Carbon Chamber at Ag Ministry in Brasilia, and I'm also leading the national program to recover degraded pasturelands in Brazil, which is Brazilian Greenway. This is a program to restore 40 million hectares in 10 years.
The core concept that we're talking here pop a little bit more and vivid. I want to hear from our panelists in terms of how they think of this beyond carbon kind of paradigm that we're in right now, and maybe what are the more sort of underappreciated or unknown sort of aspects of beyond carbon. And since you got the mic already, we'll travel down here.
For me, it's important to understand, and probably most of us, we know that, but carbon is not a commodity per se. And if it's difficult for us to understand that, imagine farmers.
I think the framing that I'd want to bring to this as well is beyond carbon cuts two ways. You know, there's the beyond carbon opportunity, but then there's also the beyond carbon risks that can be mitigated. And we've seen that even for projects that are several years out. So it's possible to capture the opportunities and to mitigate the risk systematically and early.
Yeah, I would say from the buyer's perspective, beyond carbon matters at every scale. So at a very granular project level, beyond carbon matters when we think about community uptake of a project. And then at an offtake level, it can help with de-risking certain aspects of a project. So for example, if you have yield enhancements associated with your project, then that's a way of mitigating leakage. But I think most importantly, from the perspective of someone who's a catalytic voluntary buyer in this market, it matters because it gives us this mechanism to consider what is next after the voluntary market. And so we view offtakes through the lens of how can this offtake continue to sustain the project beyond the lifetime of Google's voluntary finance itself. And one way is if the project has co-benefits that mean that policymakers pay attention to the project, or even just at a community level, people are so excited to engage with the project that they'll continue performing the practice beyond the lifetime for which we provide finance for that project.
Perfect. So I think from my perspective, carbon removal is essentially a public good, and we should not really be going into communities unless we're providing benefit beyond just the removal of carbon. And I think from my perspective, all buyers should be looking at beyond carbon. It shouldn't be an add-on, it should be a must to their purchasing, and we shouldn't be deploying unless we're providing benefit to the communities that we're working with.
Yeah, I think my answer is tying into what you said as well. It's the multiplier effect of the dollar you're spending, because first of all, you're spending it on carbon removal, so mitigation, but you're also spending it on adaptation, enhancing the soil, increasing the resilience. And next to it, you're also making social impact with boosting the salaries of the farmers. And on top of that, you're also helping startups like InPlanet and Carboneers. So your dollar can travel such a long way. And I think that's sometimes a bit underappreciated.
Great. I'll stay right here with you, Martin. We're going to talk a little bit about policy and emerging policy frameworks first. And so carbon removal is still a voluntary market, clearly, but we are seeing in exciting ways different policy frameworks at the global level, EU level, host country levels, as well as even at the subnational level that are starting to have real implications, I think, for carbon removal scale up that are relevant to buyers as well. So I wonder if you want to give your sort of impressions about what sort of exciting or policy levers are sort of starting to appear that have bearing.
It's a very big question. But I think first of all, the voluntary market has done a really great job in setting a high bar. And I think now the next interesting question is how that quality infrastructure is going to connect to the compliance market that's being built from scratch. And I think as a project developer watching on one hand, the EU closely and the UN closely, and on the other side, the frameworks of the host countries that we're operating in, so India and Ghana. And in an ideal world, all those frameworks would be unified, creating a homogeneous market and also decreasing the transaction cost. So as example, right now in Ghana, the Canadian government is making their biochar frameworks, and at the same time, the UN is developing their methodologies. And the more these frameworks converge, the more they're unified, the easier it will be for us to set up large-scale transactions, to scale this market, and eventually go to that compliance gigaton supply that we need. Whether that comes through CBAM, whether it's coming through the EU climate law or the UN Article 6 credits, but that's all the future. Right now, the market is being built by corporate demand, by ourselves, and I think that's a really, really great responsibility to have. And I think as a project developer, it's very interesting because at one moment we have to be heads down, improving operations, improving our tech, but also looking ahead and seeing what quality standards are coming at us, and also planning for the looming compliance demands. So we'll have to be in the dance, but also be at the balcony at the same time. And I think that what makes the job really fascinating.
Well said. And Eduardo, I'll go with you. So I had the great pleasure of really being focused on Brazil all last year with COP30, and through that, was just amazed by what I didn't know was already taking place in Brazil. It's not fair to call it a sleeping giant. I think it's a giant that's already hit the alarm clock and is brushing its teeth. And so there's a lot of interesting policy frameworks that are taking shape there. And I wonder if you could tell us from a buyer's perspective, do you think, what should buyers know, or what might they misunderstand about the policy context and how it's affecting them?
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was interesting. Last year during COP, hosting several different players at the agri-zone, and we start to talk about the size of Brazil. Most of the people say, Edu, probably you were wrong. I say, no, Brazil is bigger than continental US. US is a bigger country due to Alaska, but only US. If you put US in Brazil, we still have like 3 UKs left. So Brazil is 850 million hectares. Among the 850 million, 600 is protected, 600 million is bigger than whole Europe, 250 is converted. UK is 24, just to give a number. So the agriculture in Brazil is 11 times bigger than UK. So this is the size of the opportunity, also the size of the challenge, because when we talk about we make this joke for Germany. I will be in Germany in 2 weeks. And they say, probably I will visit the south because it's not that far. No, it's like only 8-9 hours. Because from my home to my farm, it will take 14. And that's okay. So the challenge is how can we spread the products and all those things. From the other side, we have the regulations. So Brazil finally approved the law in 2024.
The ETS law.
The ETS law, the Brazilian ETS, we call SBCE, but it's most likely the European ETS. It's a cap and trade regulation that includes removals, which is really, really cool. And again, we have the potential, if you go to the numbers, arguably the biggest in potential to generate 30 giga, half of the world emissions, 30 giga. But we issued last year 8 million. So 30 billion versus 8 million. We still have a lot of things to do in our country.
And I think Brazil could be a massive player with Article 6 as well, because the relatively low per capita emissions because of high renewable penetration, is they could be a real player, I think, in terms of removals through Article 6.
Yeah.
So moving to you, Ella, as a sophisticated buyer of carbon removals, give us some insights into how you're monitoring policy changes in Brazil and other places and how that sort of affects your calculus as a buyer.
Yeah, so it's something we are really plugged into at the moment. So whenever we consider an offtake, we have to think about what is on the other side of that offtake. We're a catalytic voluntary buyer. Voluntary finance in the present day market is absolutely essential to de-risking and beginning to scale the technologies that we will absolutely need as a planet. But there isn't a way for voluntary finance to reach the scale that would ultimately be required to fund carbon removal at the gigaton scale that the planet needs. And so what we have at the back of our minds is what is on the other side of a voluntary offtake that we perform, and how can we use what's on the other side to continue scaling these projects to a scale that the climate cares about. Policy is absolutely critical in that, so it's one of the main levers that we think that we have to continue scaling some of these technologies. So to give a few specific examples of the ways we might think about this, at quite a local level, one of the technologies that we're really interested in is alternate wetting and drying, which is a practice for rice methane, where you periodically drain the fields, and in doing so, you reduce the methane emissions. that has the co-benefit or the beyond carbon benefit of saving a lot of water, which in a water-stressed region is incredibly important right now. And so we know that local government entities are interested in subsidizing AWD as a practice. And in turn, if we're providing the catalytic upfront investment to have that practice happen, we can use that local government subsidy as something on the other side that would continue to have the project scale. Looking at kind of a very different example, there's a lot of movement in the EU right now associated with the ETS, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And we're beginning to think about how we can help to make catalytic offtakes in that environment such that we can encourage the EU to engage with carbon removals through the ETS and begin to establish a path for carbon removals to enter the compliance market in the EU and scale that way.
Love it. Victoria, very similar question to you, but is your position at ClimeFi is really an intermediary working with a variety of different existing, established, as well as new entrants on the buyer side. How does policy kind of figure into your own thinking and portfolio building?
Yeah, I think it certainly resonates with what Ella said, but I think the difference for us is we work with a range of buyers, the catalytic and those that are also earlier stage, who can be just as catalytic in the future, but are still learning exactly how they want to navigate this. And I'd say for all those different actors, it's really not theoretical anymore, this policy side. It's wanting to get ahead of it now. And for us, where this has come out recently is we've been working on beyond 2030 with some of our buyers, setting up portfolios for the longer term, looking from 2030 to 2040. And when we're looking at those 10 to 15-year horizons, policy isn't optional. We have to really bake that into our thinking today. And I think for us, so we're based in Europe, and we work with different buyers who have different priorities, but we've tried to spend a bit of time the last few years trying to be quite catalytic on the voluntary side, whilst also having that political support and buy-in developing at the same time. So through Article 6.2 transactions between Norway and Switzerland, and then more recently this year, working on the first EU CRCF aligned transaction as well for European buyers. And with all of that, the goal is to have this catalytic voluntary demand, but have then the government really supporting that and showing that they are there to work with the voluntary side as well. So yeah, it's not theoretical, it's happening now, it's building, and I think for us, when we talk to our buyers who are looking at these horizons, those that are engaging in policy and becoming very literate in this space and working with us to understand it are really the ones that are, getting ahead in it and making more strategic decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's now shift a bit into the kind of the science, not really the science, but how we can't just make claims about beyond carbon or benefits. These have to be measurable, known impacts that we're having, and enormous amount of progress has been made on that regard as well. And I thought I would shift to you, Christine. I'll hand you the mic. Actually, if you want to hand the mic down, it'd be great. As I was kind of hinting out, the term co-benefits at this point, I think is a bit paltry compared to what we're really kind of talking about. And I think one of the most impressive and exciting areas where we're really seeing that impact is with enhanced rock weathering. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about which agricultural benefits from ERW are now really strong enough where we can really talk about these in material ways and have evidence to really talk about it as part of the beyond carbon impacts.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I once actually heard someone refer to co-benefits as core benefits instead of co-benefits, and actually I tend to agree. I would say that the value proposition for enhanced rock weathering for benefits for farmers, for crops, is as strong as the carbon removal benefit. And I think with enhanced rock weathering, we're very lucky to work in Brazil, where there's actually quite a long history of using rock powders with agriculture as remineralizers, they call them. And this dates all the way back to the 1950s. And farmers at small scales have been using them to replace some amount of lime and chemical fertilizers. And it provides a more resilient farmer supply chain because they're less reliant on expensive imported fertilizers. But to date, actually less than 1% of farmland in Brazil deploy rock powders. And so if we can really show the benefits, quantify them really robustly, publish that transparently, work with farmers, then we should be able to drive adoption. And that adoption can come from the benefit that they're going to receive to their crops, rather than necessarily just carbon removal. In terms of what's documented, there's been lots of studies in Brazil that have shown that you can get increases in things like soil pH, so reducing soil acidity, some increases in yields, depending on the crop type, as well as improved soil moisture retention, uptake of silica into the plants can strengthen them as well, potentially improve pest resistance. So there are many, many benefits that we could provide with enhanced rock weathering.
And again, we're at a point now where we can verify these. These are really measurables.
They are, yes, and it's something that we have invested a lot of research and development into at InPlanet as well, and are sharing with our farmers, and will publish as well. We're just about to publish a meta-analysis of all the Brazilian research trials that have been done on this work, and that's going to be out in the public domain, measurable, and for anyone to read.
Back to Eduardo, actually, just to kind of follow up on that. So now if we're really talking about some of these just major impact areas like fertilizer dependence, soil degradation, and supply chain resilience on the table, again, are we really still talking about co-benefits, or are we really kind of actually talking about a full business case for adoption that's separate for carbon?
Yes, it's interesting. I'm tracking London Climate Action Week for a couple of years, and this is the first time that we talk about fertilizers in that scale. No, this is my fifth event that somehow related to fertilizers this evening, to be the seventh. When you think about Brazil, it's interesting because in the 70s, we imported food. No, today we are the largest exporter in the world. What happened in the last 70 years, 50 years? It's interesting because when we saw the quality of the soil, we have the poorest soils in the world. Too acidic, very low fertility, very low organic matter. A clear reason, because there is a lot of intemperance. So the weathering, it's too intense. So wash everything. In the 70s, when we brought breeding plus the fertilizers, we grow up to become the third largest producer, the largest exporter. The bad size I can put in comma, because I'm agronomist, it's not bad. We just replenish the soil. But today, we are the largest importer of fertilizer. So we consume 50 million, the fourth largest consumer in the world, 50 million tons. We imported 45. So imagine all the wars in the last years, and how desperate the farmers are, because they say, oh, okay, we have 90% of dependency, 45 in 50 million. And when you look at the future, when you talk about recovering 40 million hectares of degraded lands, we will increase the consumption in 25 million tons. And then we will become the third largest fertilizer consumer in the world. And definitely, the way that we're seeing all this, I can put in comma here, but the new technologies, as ERW, SOC, the biochar, it will help us not just to increase the quality of the soil, because again, we put more organic matter, we can reduce increase the pH, actually, reduce the acidity, and then arguably, we can reduce our dependency on imports of fertilizers. So this is a very, very interesting moment for all of us. And in the end of the day, also capture carbon. So it sounds a very nice idea.
Yeah, if I could just stay with you for a second too. So these are all, we're putting these pieces together and we see a really strong business case. From a farmer type of view though, what do you think has to sort of be true in terms of their visibility on these as well for this to really take off from a demand side?
Yeah. Okay, I'm a farmer. Last year, we bought urea with $300, and we thought wow, it's too expensive. We will die. In a year, 1.2 thousand, 4 times more. Now reduce it. But imagine a farmer, a regular farmer, that have no idea about Hormuz Strait, all of the war, and all the things who will produce what. So when you come back to the farmers to say, okay, there is an opportunity here, there is strong science on board, we can produce more data, but the data that we have already is good enough to prove that there is a way to enhance the quality of the soils and therefore reduce the dependency. It's not about to stop using chemical fertilizers. it won't occur, because every time that we harvest 10 tons of corn, in these 10 tons of corn, I always mention that joke because say, when you eat banana, because they have potassium, it's not the banana, it's the soil, it's the potassium chloride. That in case of Brazil, we import 40% from Canada, 40% from Russia. So the potassium that you ate in banana here, the banana that you imported from Brazil, the largest producer of banana in the world, the potassium that you ate probably come from Saskatchewan in Canada. So that's the globalization of food, and that's the reality.
Absolutely. And Martin, to shift to you in the context that you're operating in Africa, just curious if you can give insights to how this business case we were just talking about translates and how it's sort of gaining purchase, I guess.
I think there was a fantastic macro overview. I can do it a bit more micro from a company perspective, because I think we see that adoption case both from governments and from corporates now in the field. For example, if you take the cocoa value chain, that's becoming more and more unstable, and due to climate change mainly, but also spiking fertilizer prices are not helping either. And biochar, when applied to the soil, is not only removing carbon, but it is also retaining water in the topsoil and also attracting nutrients. So it's essentially de-risking the value chain and making it more resilient. And as you may know, the Netherlands really love chocolate. We are, I think, the third largest importer of cocoa, and Ghana is one of the biggest exporters. So the Dutch government and the embassy asked us to set up model farms to show the farmers there how they can be more resilient while using biochar. And the interesting thing is now also that on the other side, the Ghanaian government is getting more interest in this as well. Again, also because of the spiking fertilizer prices. So that's the government adoption side. And then next to it, you also see that soft commodity traders, who simply know that this instability is bad for business, are now asking us to set up insetting operations, so biochar inside of their value chain, because it's great. They can use the removals and the reductions for the accounting. They have a better relationship with their farmer because of social impact, but mainly because they're looking for a more resilient supply chain, and they know that's what biochar can deliver. And that's on theory, that's practice, and it's happening right now. And I think that's something to be super optimistic about, because it shows the inherent value of the beyond carbon value.
Excellent, great. Well, let's, how are we doing on time here? I don't know if anyone wants to gesture at me if we're ahead of schedule or not. Time flies when you're having awesome discussions about ag-based CDR. I do want to now, let's talk about really where the rubber really hits the road, which we all have to monitor, which is really the delivery process and really with a lens on integrity. We're now at a phase where purchases are outpacing issuances, and there's a big question of how much delivery will actually happen, and that obviously has enormous relevance to buyers. And so, Ella, I think I'll sort of start with you. When you look at it from a buyer, like what should you be most sort of convinced by at this stage? The kind of elegance of the science, or the rigor of the disclosure, or really just the evidence that suppliers can actually deliver tons on time? What kind of, I would imagine the latter holds a lot of water, but tell us a little bit about how you're looking at delivery right now.
That's a great question, and there's a lot to unpack there. I think to make it a little bit simpler, the way that we think about all of the pathways and all of the projects that we procure from is through the lens of certainty and scale. So to begin with certainty, what that means to us is first the conviction that at a fundamental scientific level, a project is net negative, in that over the course of the project lifetime, when you consider all of the emissions and all of the removals, it results in more removals than it does emissions. That's something that at this stage in the market we have relatively high conviction on across a number of pathways, but that's certainly been a journey for all of us. And the other aspect of certainty that we really care about is the ability to verify with a high degree of integrity that a removal has taken place. Because of course, at Google, we operate through the lens of a climate goal, and ultimately we would need to make a claim against the credits that we have. Once with the certainty pieces in place, we would then consider scale. So we would ask the fundamental question, do we believe that a particular pathway and a particular offtake within a particular pathway has the capacity to scale, both for Google's own climate goals and ultimately well beyond Google's own climate goals to a scale that matters to the planet? I think delivery then comes next along the line of the things that we would consider. So we do, of course, need to have a high conviction that a particular supplier and a particular pathway is capable of delivering. as a catalytic buyer, I think at this stage in the market, we're able to be a little bit more forgiving with some delivery delays. And the question that comes into mind for us is really not, is there a delay, but is there actually the capacity to deliver? So I would probably separate out delivery risk into a delivery delay risk, which is something that's a little bit easier to tolerate at this point in the market, versus kind of a more catastrophic failure, which is something a little bit more challenging. But all to say, I think zooming out again, for us, the two key things at the moment are certainty and scale, and we would move from that into an examination of a more kind of project by project based delivery.
Great, excellent. And to Victoria, somewhat along the same lines, again, as your position sitting between buyers and suppliers, beyond the carbon ton itself, what are buyers do you find really diligencing in early stage projects, and how do you do that when most of the market is still pre-issuance?
Yeah, it's great to keep following Ella, because there's a lot that she's saying that I'm like, great, we're on board, we're with you too. I think, we're speaking to multiple buyers. We're not everyone has the ability to be Google, and I think that's understandable right now, and we're hopeful more will come. But for us, it's fairly similar on what we look at and what we provide in the diligencing that we put together. It's on that carbon integrity side, that things that the market is getting more and more mature on, hopefully moving away from more uncertainty and more stories coming out on that carbon side, especially on CDR, where we're really having the opportunity to build a lot of robust methodologies at this stage. Then there's that delivery side. Of course, we similarly see it on two axes. Will it deliver, and how long is the delay, or is the delay non-negotiable? There's, of course, for each buyer, that strategic piece, and that's where we've been discussing policy and other things. But for me, and I'm sorry, my background's diligence, and I just love to talk about this, but for me, an important aspect is the beyond carbon integrity of a project. And it's really unpacking what are the potential beyond carbon risks, and how are they being mitigated on the project level. So that's something that we look at, and buyers are coming to us and asking us to look at that, because that's where the reputational hit may come from for them. That's what they're nervous about. If a story comes out in the news around lack of consent, or grievances not being heard, and it's going to local news, that's something that we already want to get ahead of, and put that in front of our buyers, and make sure that we're de-risking that as much as possible. And at the project level, it's some projects are doing this, are implementing the safeguards now, and are really doing different practices to already get ahead of this. And I think, we're all here, so I think it's clear that we're working with two of the suppliers on this panel with me today, who are some that we're looking into, that beyond carbon risk as well as the carbon side. So I'm sorry, Chris, I'm gonna take over a little bit for a second, but I'd love to get Martin and Christina to actually talk about potentially some of the ways that you're looking at beyond carbon integrity as well, and how you're implementing that within your projects.
There's a lot to tell there, and I'm looking at the team, and I think everyone would pick a different bit. But me personally, I'm a very big fan of the newest integration in our app, where we can pay the farmers that we work with directly. So there's no middleman anymore, there's no cash involved anymore, and there's full financial transparency, which we can also show to the buyers.
I think from my side, reputational risk is as much an issue for us as a supplier as it is for the buyer. Like, in the end, we don't want to have any reputational issues either. And I think a key example of something that we look into is specifically environmental risk associated with enhanced rock weathering. There is some environmental risk, but what we do is report very transparently on that risk. So, for example, all of the metal content data from all of our projects is public through a non-profit called Cascade Climate, through their data quarry. And it's something that we obviously report to regularly to ClimeFi, for example. And that's so important for us as much as it is for the buyer's reputational risk.
Sorry, I'm taking it back again. But it's these sort of stories that are really important to unpack, because suppliers are doing different things at the supplier level. Like, it's, safeguards on the financial flows, understanding the environmental reporting, like that is something that you can do a due diligence on at one moment, and a supplier might not have it. But where we want to come in and where we want to support our buyers is then ensuring that diligence isn't just static, but it's dynamic. It's something that we can revisit. And so we are speaking with our suppliers on an ongoing basis, on a quarterly basis, to check in. We did this due diligence at the start of our portfolio that we set up. How have you progressed? How have the risks progressed? I think that's really important on this Beyond Carbon side, is to really remember, it's not just one and done. It's something that we have to monitor. And as we look at pre-issuance, as we look towards the future, we have buyers that are buying credits in 2030, 2031. We want to ensure today that the Beyond Carbon risk is mitigated as much as it can be, and then to monitor that and track it on this ongoing basis. So.
Excellent. No, you can steal the mic anytime you want to from me on a panel. Well, I just looked at my watch and I cannot believe we've already gone through almost the whole hour. So we will end with a kind of a provocative question that we'll go down the line here. I think one of the things about, let's just give a round of applause. Well, this will be weird because you're a lot of buyers in there, but we really need to applaud the kind of special animal that CDR buyers are, that really jumped in. And it was a weird thing where the buyers were there right alongside with the suppliers, really making this wholly new enterprise. And the same applies right now when we think about Beyond Carbon, about how that gets internalized in buyer decisions. So just want to ask a question, we can go right down the line, is 5 years from now, what will distinguish a buyer that helped build market trust from one that merely participated in the market? So I'll hand it.
I can give a very simple and concrete example. We just recently signed a 10-year offtake deal with IMC, a high-frequency trading company, and we guarantee for them the demand that they need for a fixed price. And I think they will be one of the companies, and many of those companies that are building the market right now, that are also stress-free when supply is actually getting tighter over the years.
I think from my side, a buyer that maybe took a risk, maybe paid a slightly higher price point to really drive forward the research, close the research gaps that are needed to get carbon removal technologies, really catalyze them to get them to the scale that they need to get to actually meet our climate mitigation targets.
Okay, well, I would say that anyone who is currently buying in the market is doing a good job. So I would hesitate to make a value judgment about which buyers might look better 5 years from now as a result of how they functioned in the present market. It is a very difficult market to buy in, and I appreciate that not everyone has the sort of resources and license that Google might do to go out and make some pretty exciting but potentially relatively high risk offtakes. What I would say is I would encourage every buyer in this room to think about Beyond Carbon and to think about it through the lens of what happens beyond the lifetime of your offtake. So we're all here today because we want to scale the market and we want to have an impact that matters at a climate relevant scale. And the reality is that our voluntary finance is a long way from that at the moment. And every dollar matters when we're thinking about how to ultimately get to that climate relevant scale. So absolutely, if you're able to, if it's within your capacity as a buyer, begin to think about how Beyond Carbon can take you from the lifetime of your offtake to a project scaling and having a climate relevant impact. And hopefully you could look back on it in 5 years' time and think we had a climate relevant impact as opposed to just one that offset the emissions of our own business.
I think when, picking up on all of you guys are saying, for us, when we're looking at who's going to really have that power in the 5 years, it's those that are really looking long-term and strategically about this, as Mark said. And with that as well, it comes with the portfolio approach, having de-risking your strategy as much as possible. With that as well, it comes with the diligencing the projects. It comes with monitoring them. It comes with understanding where a project is delayed versus will not deliver. And that might sound like a tall order, because I didn't even mention on top of that, you've got to be holding the suppliers to high quality standards. And that might sound like a tall order, but to be honest, we work with lots of buyers who are doing this right now, who are moving the needle forward and who are showing that it's possible. So instead of feeling like there's no pathway to follow, I think it's the buyers who are seeing, okay, there is a path, there is others that we can learn from, we can collaborate with, and there is a path forward in the market.
For me, I know the quote because it's the early bird gets the worm. And it's really interesting because there's no sense in Brazil. not at all. And it's funny because we don't have cold, no, so there's no reason for the early bird, warm, what does it mean? But for sure, I know the translation. No, for Brazil means that o boi que chega primeiro bebe água limpa, which means that the cattle that arrives the first in the pond will drink clear water. So that's the way that we translate in Portuguese. And it's funny because, again, no, there is a lot of opportunities, but the ones that will arrive first will learn faster, and then you can scale up faster than the others. No, there's a lot of pinpoints in the middle of the journey, but definitely it's an amazing journey. And please join us and visit us in Piracicaba if you can. Arrange that visit and let's make it happen.
Just a couple of concluding thoughts. I mean, I think this idea of beyond carbon, although I think is a word to practically use, I like the core benefits one. I think that's quite usable. I came from solar before I jumped into CDR about 10 years ago. When I jumped in, there was this sense of, well, at least with solar, you get electrons, and carbon removal is this thing that you just buy for the sake of an offset, and we don't even know if it'll work. And I think that way of looking at carbon removal, and hopefully we've convinced you of that, is completely disintegrated, I think. In fact, that we see there's enormous value that's added through carbon removal solutions. And so one thing I would sort of put forward to the buyers is, let's start talking about it that way. Let's come up with a language that is more holistic, so we're not just talking about, here's our carbon removal thing we're doing, but the kinds of impact that we're having in the world in other ways by buying carbon removal, which is very, very exciting. So now I think comes first, give a giant round of applause for our amazing panel here. Thank you guys very much.